the most demonized macronutrient by far is carbohydrate.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that
so
question.
you talked about rolled oats, you talked about whole grain bread if I'm going to eat an omelet. Carbohydrates, aren't carbohydrates the enemy? They'll make you fat. Their body turns them into sugar. Carbohydrates. Carol, what do we do about carbs?
One of the most fundamental facts in nutrition is that the human body needs to have about 135 grams of carbohydrate every day. And cells run on carbohydrate. Let me back up. Cells run on glucose. Glucose comes from carbohydrate. You need glucose. The best source is carbohydrates. And it's interesting that we like carbohydrates. So it's like your body's wisdom is saying, bring on some carbohydrates because that's what I need. The problem is that people are using excessive amounts, and most of it's processed. So your sugars and your white flours and those highly processed types of things. But carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables, whole grains are fine to include. So 135 grams per day, that's about 9 servings. So 3 servings per day, 3 servings per meal would give you your 9 servings. So there are some issues, of course, with gluten sensitivity. There's the celiac, the people who are dealing with celiac sprue, intolerance of gluten. They need to be very careful about what they choose. But there are some non-glutinous grains that can be used too. Some people notice that if they're eating gluten-containing foods that they have joint issues. But they should not take off the table all of the grains just because it's unwise to say all grains are bad, because they absolutely are not. You have to be selective and find the ones that you like and that you tolerate well. And if you find that wheat-containing products don't do well for you, some people say that they have joint issues if they're eating gluten types of foods without having celiac disease. So you kind of have to check that out. But you can have grains.
There's so many interesting studies about people that sort of believe they have gluten sensitivities that really don't, but we don't want to be too flippant because there obviously are people that really do. So give us a couple of things that you think people should be eating in terms of grains and good quality carbohydrates, so that way if people are listening to this and thinking, I'm going to give this a shot, I already heard about some of the protein sources that are okay. What are some of the carbohydrate sources that you would recommend?
Well, I really like quinoa. It's a grain that has lots of good properties and beneficial properties and so forth. Again, anything that's a whole grain, and it's more in the the brown rice or the teff or some of these other either ancient grains or grains that have been around. Well, whether they're ancient Aztec grains or grains that are common in the Middle East. But we want to get away from a lot of the highly processed types of things that's so pervasive in the United States. Rice is a very neutral grain, but there's not a whole lot of nutrition in rice. If you are going to eat rice, you want to eat brown rice. And there's also the issue of arsenic in rice. So one of the things that you can do to avoid that problem is to cook rice in a lot of water. That leaches the arsenic out of the rice. But then again, you don't want to have a diet that's all rice. Get some variety in there. Even if you like rice, that's having some occasionally is fine. But there are other grains that have much more a better nutrition profile.
I asked a dietitian once about rice, and he said similar things to what you said. There's black rice and red rice, and there's a variety. But then he also said if there was so much arsenic, Japan, India,
Exactly.
China, we would have a lot of dead people.
Right.
There'd be a lot of arsenic poisoning sort of around the world. Yeah. This conversation leads us beautifully into the talk about sugar. There certainly is a lot of belief that the sugar industry, you hear about the tobacco industry kind of went into big food and processed food. They use the same playbook that the tobacco industry did. And then you get people that are kind of on, again, the sort of the Joe Rogan slant of if you're eating grass-fed beef, wild game, those are great protein sources because it's not factory farmed. And then it's really about sugar. So all these studies we've been talking about, all these people that have showed heart disease reversal and so forth, isn't it just that they're helping people not eat as much sugar, and sugar is really the culprit, not meats and all of that?
Well, sugar is a highly processed food, and it's very dense in calories, and so that's not very helpful when people are struggling with weight issues. We don't need to have that concentrated sweetener. It's one of those things that's kind of addictive, so once you start eating a lot of sugar, you want more and more, and it's really hard to cut back on it. But you can wean yourself off very successfully just by going to a minimal level. So sugar it can be pro-inflammatory, which is not a good thing. But it's mostly because it's in junk food along with white sugar and fat and so forth. So it's really good to get the sugar out of the diet. So you decrease your calories, you decrease your risk for inflammation issues and so forth.
Are there some sweeteners that are better than others, or not really?
Well, they're all sugar. I mean, they all literally boil down to sugar. If I need to have some kind of sweetener, I use agave nectar.
Okay.
So it's a fructose. It's mostly fructose, but a small amount. Your body can handle that. Okay. Your body's designed to handle these types of sugars. I mean, it's glucose. You just don't want to have a whole lot of it.
What's your take on artificial sweeteners?
Stay away from them.
From all of them?
Yeah, I would stay away from all of them. They're not a natural food. Your liver doesn't really know what to do with them. And it's interesting that people who do artificial sweeteners, they often still have weight problems. So it's almost as if you're tasting something. If you have the taste of something sweet in your mouth, it translates into issues as far as weight are concerned. It doesn't make sense, but that's what the research is showing.
So I can definitely attest to the fact that being somebody who I like my soda, and I grew up drinking diet soda. You'll hear people say it'll make you hungrier. That's true for me. And I don't know. You hear people say, "Oh, it's an insulin spike. It's a whatever else." It may just be something sweet. Those of you not watching on YouTube, Cooper and I are drinking zero sugar Monster energy drinks while Carol's drinking water. So we know who's the healthiest person, and it's not the 24-year-old in the room. It's obviously the person who's older than that. So what about stevia? Do you have an opinion on stevia?
Well, it's from a plant, so that's a good thing, but it still is very highly processed. I mean, you can grow your own stevia plants and clip off a leaf and sweeten your tea or whatever if you want to do that. That would be a better way to do it.
I like stevia. I have to admit, I sort of moved myself into stevia not long ago, and there's the soda you can get called Zevia. Which is not a sponsor of this program, although like I said about Old Capital Tofu, I would be open to that idea. But I kind of like that. It took me a while to get the taste of it in my mouth. It's different than Diet Coke and so forth, but everything I've read about stevia is that I haven't seen anything negative per se. There's who I'm talking about, but the researcher and personality named Michael Greger has sort of given that one the green light, as well as something called date sugar, which is just pulverized dates, but that has calories in it versus something like stevia,
but it's a real food. It's a whole food.
It's a whole food in that way. So, but so in the Carol Throckmorton plan, not even stevia, just stay away.
I'm very much into the whole food thing. It's like, just wean yourself off of those kinds of things and say, okay, I can do better than that. I don't need those kinds of things. I don't buy sodas, for an example. You don't have to buy sodas. You don't have to drink sodas.